thank you again for joining us. I'm Hemione Hudson, PwC UK's Head of Audit. And today I'm joined by Claire Hawkins from the Phoenix Group and Jon Mortimore from Dr. Martens. So perhaps let's start with some intros. Claire, let me come to you first.
Thank you very much, Hermione. Thank you very much for welcoming me. My name's Claire Hawkins and I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs and Investor Relations at the Phoenix Group. We are the UK's largest long-term savings and retirement business, which means we're looking after about £270 billion worth of assets on behalf of our 12 million customers. And if you've not heard of Phoenix, you might have heard of some of our consumer brands like Standard Life and Sun Life. And I've been with this group for over 20 years. Prior to that, I trained as a chartered accountant with PwC, and I've had many different roles within the organisation, taking my current role about 4 years ago.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome. Jon, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks. Hi, Jon Mortimore. I'm CFO at Dr. Martens. I've been at Docs for coming up 8 years. Main thing over the past 3 years, about 3 years ago, roughly 2 weeks to the day, we listed on London Stock Exchange at one of those perfect moments in time when the world was coming out of COVID and there wasn't two wars and there wasn't inflation. And it's been a ride since then. I always previously I was at Docs as well for 5 years under PE ownership.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. As you say, a brief window in time of not so much geopolitical turmoil. So there is growing demand from investors and regulators and wider society for companies to tell a clearer and more coherent story. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. And how we balance the needs of different stakeholders as they kind of tackle all of these issues. Claire, perhaps it's a good place for us to start in terms of asking you, why do you think that reporting is important? What matters about it to you?
Well, Hermione, we know that business is all about relationships and trust, and that our different stakeholders are looking to form opinions on us that will inform their decision making about us. So whether that's a decision to invest in our company, to become a customer, or take a job with us. And they form those opinions based on what we communicate to them. And reporting is the bedrock of that communication. So that big set piece of reporting that we do once a year is the time when companies have to take a really hard look at themselves in the mirror and report against the targets they set the previous year. And we're forced to do that in a way that means our reporting has to be fair and balanced, complies with all the reporting regs, and is often subject to an audit or an assurance opinion from somebody like PwC. And all of that means it's credible and really important. But what we have seen is that our audiences will be forming their opinions on a much wider set of issues today than just our financial results, and therefore need a much broader set of reporting materials than just the traditional annual report and accounts. So if we want those opinions to be favourable, if we want to win that pitch and we want to attract the best talent, it's really important that our reporting is relevant to our audiences, that it uses languages that they understand, that we don't just look to the past of what we've done, but we're also talking about what we're going to do in the future, and that we explain how we conduct ourselves in business. And as a result, reporting has exploded, a proliferation of different reports now to make sure that we cover all of that broad range of topics. And also the channels that we use are changing too, which I think is really interesting. Not just the dusty old PDFs stuck on a web page somewhere, but actually bringing those reporting messages to life through website and social media, which enables us to tailor our content to our different audiences, make it much more real-time and dynamic, and give that communication flow that stakeholders are wanting to form those opinions about our businesses that they need to do.
Thank you, Claire. And you covered a huge amount there. And I want to come back to lots of those key messages around actually the format of reporting, around what we're reporting on, non-financial reporting, as well as financial reporting. But let's start with the transparency element and the kind of honesty element. And Jon, I'm going to come to you because you and Dr. Martens were the winner of our FTSE 350 award at our recent Building Public Trust Awards. And what the judges really felt set you apart was your openness and honesty, and particularly talking about things that hadn't gone so well. So I wonder if you could kind of explain the approach you take and the approach you take about actually how do you transparently report to stakeholders?
Yeah, it was about a year ago. So we had, I'll explain a bit of context. We had a proper old school warehouse blowout. What we were doing is we had an old warehouse in Portland, Oregon, top left of America if you're looking at a map. And the lease came to an end, and we moved the warehouse to a new modern third-party logistics center, or 3PL, in Los Angeles, where all the boats came in with the boots from manufacturing in Asia. The way you would normally move inventory from one DC to another, you build some racking, you move your inventory in, you stack your DC, and you build some more racking. You do it in phases. That's how the whole world has normally done this. Somebody in our US management team decided to defy the laws of supply chain logistics and try and move all of the inventory in one go. And surprisingly, we ended up with lots of containers in the car park. This was then compounded by one of our largest customers saying, would you mind, rather than taking inventory direct from factory to their warehouse, would you mind storing it in your warehouse first for us? And rather than saying, no, we won't do it, we said yes, which meant we had far too many containers.
Even more containers in the car park.
Oh God, yeah, we had loads of them. And a DC works if it's 80% capacity, so 20% you can then pick and pack and move stuff around. We were full, the whole thing just ground to a halt. This was not a pleasant thing, and hence you into territory of profit warning and early announcements. And by definition, when you're doing something early, you haven't got the full story, you're still pulling things together, and the commentary and presentation is not polished. It's a way of thinking about it. But at this moment of really high stress, it became very clear that keeping the message simple, keeping the communication simple, was critical to protecting the value. And by that saying, the only way we could do it was saying, being honest, management screwed this up. It's an old school warehouse blowout. We couldn't blame the DC. We couldn't blame computers. It was a management issue, and we will fix it. But that meant we could then properly reassure the brand was strong, the strategy was valid, the white space growth and the shops and the websites were all good. And that was, to protect that, we had to just say, this is what happened, and that's what happened. And that was the real value of it. It was quite a painful experience, but actually the simplicity of saying that meant all of our Q&A afterwards just fell into place.
What a brilliant example. Really fantastic.
It's a brilliant example. And I think even in this short time on this, live, we've understood what went wrong, right? So I think you're right. Yeah. Keeping it simple is really important. And clearly, I think that's what reporting should really be about. And it, I'm hoping, worked, Jon.
It did, because I think a lot of investors, they were a little bit miffed, which is not surprising, because profit warning early announcements are not good, and profits obviously came in lower. But the key was long-term value still valid, long-term strategy still valid, growth story still valid. It was a moment in time. Yes, management screwed up. Yes, you needed to fix it, and we did. And there was lots of focus on that. But the bigger picture value was protected, and that was the important piece. So yes, it worked, because it just did, and it made also all the Q&A easier, because sometimes I think you can get sucked into sort of saying that here's the good bits and not talking about the bad bits, or this has worked or that has worked. And the more and more questions you get, your brain gets very confused. It was a lot easier to say, this was us, we messed up, we own it, we'll fix it, but this other stuff isn't touched, it's really good. And that was the value of it.
It's a very refreshing approach. So Claire, I'm going to come back to you now with one of the things that you talked about, which was the non-financial reporting. And one of the things that, as I talk to, many organisations across the market, one of the things that they are talking about a lot is ESG reporting and what should this look like? How do we approach it for our organisation? You've done quite a bit at Phoenix Group around this. So do you want to just share what your experience has been?
Of course, yeah, I'd be delighted to. And I think really our approach to reporting changed as we went through a particular pivot in our organisation. I mentioned that we're a large company, and we became large by buying other businesses, essentially. And so our reporting was very focused on our returns to shareholders. It's quite monoline. But with size comes responsibility. And as we became the UK's largest, we realised, and we took the decision to have a conscious pivot towards being a purpose-led business. So that's really thinking about the role that we're fulfilling within society to help people journey to and through retirement, to really think about building those mutually beneficial relationships with all of our stakeholders and bring balance to our decision making, and also to think much more deliberately about the issues across the ESG agenda that matter most to Phoenix and where we can have the most impact. And so that pivot meant that we went from just talking primarily about our financial results and the money we'd made to our investor audiences, being very backward looking in nature, but thinking increasingly about how we would report to all of those stakeholders about what really mattered to them. So much more about setting out our vision on our strategy, much more about being really bold and ambitious in our targets and actually not fearing whether we achieved all of them or not, but making sure we held ourselves to account. And also looking to communicate to a much wider range of stakeholders. So the importance of our colleagues, the importance of future talent, politicians who we wanted to influence, and obviously our customers. And so we've really exploded the reporting that we do. We've introduced a sustainability report, which is really focused on the actions that we want to take across the people and planet agenda. We've just recently, or back earlier last year, a net zero transition plan saying how are we actually going to meet that heroic target of being net zero by 2050. We've introduced a stewardship report. I mentioned we look after, lots and lots of people's money for them over the very, very, very long term, which means we're a very powerful investor. How do we hold those companies we invest into account? And then gone more broadly into reports around thought leadership on the things that matter most to our customers, and leveraging all of that, not just through the dusty old PDF, but through social media feeds, through advertising, through website content. So a real step change about communicating, who we're communicating with, about what and how.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And one of the other things that you talked about, but I'm now going to come to Jon for a view on, is that there has been this proliferation of reporting. And it's great that we're talking about reporting in so many more different areas that different stakeholders are interested in. But how do you balance that and make sure that we are not over-reporting? Because I hear a lot of people saying that there's just too much and we don't know where to look for the key messages, and how do I get to what's really important to me? So, Jon, how do you think about that?
I think the way to think about it is twofold. Firstly, I think it's incumbent on management to always write down, keeping things simple. What is the so what? There's all the regulation, and we've got to kill loads of trees to bang all this stuff together. But then the so what is incredibly important, which is management's job, or the director's job, saying, and I think you as a stakeholder should focus on X, Y, and Z because that's important. But here's all the other stuff that backs it up, and that sometimes is really hard, particularly in some of the emerging technologies around climate reporting. It's been driven quite rightly by people who know what's going on, but there's lots of jargon, and interpreting that jargon into what does it mean in real life is quite tricky, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try and keep things simple. I think the other thing to note on a report on accounts is it's changed over the years. There are very few people, apart from a couple of people in the company and a couple of people with the audit firm, a few shadows, who will read page 1 to page 1,000,001. People use report accounts as sections or discrete sections, and if you think about, people will dip in and out of those sections. Therefore, each section should have some context. Each section should have the so what, and each section then have cross-reference between the different sections. But it's rare someone reads page 1 to page 1,000,000. But just each section should then work harder with an overview, with a so what, which is unusual because it gives you repetition. And I've had lots of advice over the years saying, oh, you've been repeating what you said on page 1 on page 92. Well, so what? As long as it's not repetition for repetition's sake and it's sent in context, I think that's the way. But it's hard work. It really is hard work.
Yeah, I think lots of good things there. We actually publish our annual report online so that people can get to the right sections in exactly the way that you're talking about, because it's a format in which people can get to what they want. It does mean you have to have an element of repeating the messages that you're going to have. For example, in the overview, they're going to repeat in some of the more detailed sections, but people will want to see that detail somewhere. I actually think it's also very interesting because we can tell what people are interested in, because we can tell from the clicks what they're reading. And of course, when you know, in the old world, when you just sent out a glossy, you'd no idea what they were most interested in. Now, actually, we can tell what are people interested in. So for our organisation, for example, I know that people are very interested in our diversity targets and what we're publishing in terms of diversity targets. And so from an ESG perspective, they're interested in all of it. But the S element of it is quite important when people look at PwC. I don't know, Claire, you talked about having yours kind of on an online format, and are you also tracking what people are looking at, and has it changed your views on where you might need to focus your reporting?
Oh, massively, yeah. I mean, I've been, as I said, doing this job for about 4 years, and we've been really focused on evolving our reporting and our messaging over time, with the outcome being, let's make sure our audiences, we're getting to our audiences, they're hearing what we're saying, and hopefully they're influenced by it. But we traditionally spent, good 3 months of the year really sweating those million pages that Jon just referred to, with these big long reports. And after we'd published 3 reports, our annual report and accounts, sustainability report, climate change report, published them all at the same time towards the end of March. And we got the download stats for our PDFs. And I think we'd had about 200,000 downloads of our annual report and accounts. Not bad. We'd had about 2,000 downloads of the sustainability report, and we'd had about 200 downloads of the climate report. Now, that does not mean that people aren't interested in what we're doing on climate change. Not at all. It just means the report was totally impenetrable and stuck away on we knew we'd published it. Nobody else knew we'd published it. So actually, it's almost impossible to get people to report back to you or give you feedback on those long form reports. But if you use them as the platform and the stepping stone for the rest of your communication program, and you slice and dice them in different ways, and you make them accessible, or you turn them into social media posts, that's when you start to understand what people are interested in. And I agree, Hermione, we check our website pages, how many click-throughs, how long are people spending on pages, where do they fall off? We monitor all of that so we can see that. But actually, it almost gets more fascinating when you say, okay, well, when we posted something on social media, how many engagements did it get? How many likes? How many shares? That's when you know you're on the topic, which is really important to people. Or actually, when we speak to our specialist audiences, if we're out with a journalist and we want them to run a story, do they or don't they? Because do they think their audiences care? Same with if we want to, we're running interviews on local radio. Are people interested in that topic? And then what do our colleagues tell us through our active listening that they're bothered about, and why do future talents say they're joining? And Hermione, I'm with you. It generally comes back to that idea of being your culture, your values, your purpose, walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And that's what reporting can really do. It can set out the talk, but it can evidence the walk. And I think that brings right the way back to Jon's opening comment about the experience they had, and being really open and transparent about the fact it was a media. I don't know what the technical term was, Jon. It wasn't cock-up, was it? But it was something along those lines.
We owned the problem.
You owned the problem. I love it.
We owned it.
You owned it. Brilliant.
Owned the problem. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Actually, something you said, just to build on what you said, Claire, I think as well, when you think about who reads or who looks at the different sections, you think how you learn or you understand yourself. Some people can cope with tables of numbers. Yeah. Some people like words. Some people like pictures and graphs. Other people like individual examples of people who've done it. As long as you incorporate all of those, you kind of pick up the different ways people read and understand. And I think one of the things you said around reporting on all of the sustainability ESG stuff, I think one of the reasons we're all wrestling with that, because it's like emerging technology, for want of a better description. There's not the normal rules of how you can learn, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't all keep trying to make it less impenetrable. We'll make mistakes along the way. That doesn't matter. As long as it's just baby steps and copying best practice, we'll end up in a much better place, that all of a sudden we will be able to understand all of the full ESG rather than bits of it.
Yeah. I agree. And I think I like your point about the formal reporting is the bedrock, and then you build off it all of the communications that are going out in so many different platforms, so many different media. And then this point of getting feedback is really important, Jon, how do you kind of gather feedback about what's landing and what's not landing so well?
I think we are not as clever as Claire's been saying at the moment, because we're still learning. I've been recently listed. I think a lot of it is talking to investors, it's talking to actually as well a lot of our employees, what bits do they read? Because it's interesting, existing employees read their relevant bits, as well as how much the directors get paid, all that good fun.
Of course.
But a lot of potential recruits tend to read the strategy, and then they read the relevant few pages, the front summary of the bit they're interested in or the bit they're applying for. And we've found it's been going from a private equity to a listed land. The communication you get from a report and accounts makes recruitment much easier than previously, because people can come in with a high level of base understanding of what the company's all about and where we're trying to get to.
Yeah, good, very good point. And we certainly see an engagement with people who are looking to join us in our reporting. I think there are so many different audiences now, and this is a theme that's come through in everything we've discussed today, is that we're not just aiming at one audiences, and the investor audience is very important, but it's only one audience, the kind of broader stakeholders. And I'm interested in, for maybe Jon, to start with you, do you get anything from customers in terms of what they're looking for from reporting?
We do. We get interest from customers, wholesale customers. So they are customers. They read from the point of view is, what is the company doing? Has the company got loads of cash? Where's the messaging? How's the control work? So you've got the more professional customers, but more customers who buy individual pairs of boots. And this also goes with staff, because a lot of staff buy a product. That is the audience that are much more interested in the sustainability angle, the diversity angle. Not so much some of the ESG and carbon reporting, because that's a bit complex at this moment in time. But what are you doing about diversity? What are you doing around sustainability in terms of talking about that? To take docs, leather is already an offshoot of the food industry. So think about circular economy. That's tick one. If you look after your pair of docs the last 9 or 10 years, what's the most sustainable thing you've got? Is something you bought already. So it's not fast fashion, it's not throwaway. And that has a real resonance with our employees and also a number of consumers, particularly younger end of consumers. And so that piece of reporting around certain things like that, telling the real story, or what's the substance behind what we're doing rather than here's pages of numbers, is incredibly important to the doc story.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And again, you brought it to life for us really well. Claire, talking about end users and consumer, the people who are saving for their retirement for the long term, what is it that they are really interested in your reporting?
I mean, so that is a really good question, because, pension is a low engagement activity. People sit in the pub and they do talk about their mortgages, and they do talk about, now they talk about how much they're paying for their fuel bills, and they'll probably definitely talk about whichever brand of Dr. Martens it was that Claudia Winkleman wanted, and you switched them off and she was very upset. But people don't talk about their pensions. It's a real issue, and it's a real subject that we really need to crack as a sector. We have a very, very bad reputation of making everything super complicated, and that's partly because it is, and partly because the regulator asks us to make it super complicated. It's one of the things that really terrifies me about the transparency of reporting, is that we just make it so blooming hard. Only the techies can understand it, and not the customers we're trying to serve. But we really do hope, in the same way as Jon was talking very passionately about what customers of Dr. Martens want to think and feel about their Dr. Martens, that's something that we believe could be really impactful for trying to get people engaged in thinking about their pensions, thinking about the impact that what their pensions are invested in can have. So you wouldn't think about owning shares in Shell or BP, for example, but via your pension scheme, you probably will, because they're going to be tracking a FTSE 100 and they're going to be in there. So maybe then you feel a bit more passionate about the fact that actually you could influence what Shell and BP are going to do through your pensions. And all of a sudden your pensions can be quite influential to you. And we work with some NGOs who are particularly campaigning around that, to try and hope that actually that good work that we're doing, even if you can't get to people through thinking about, would you like to save more money for your retirement, maybe you can get them to it through thinking about the impact that those savings can have on the world in which they live. So low engagement traditionally from customers, actually in our reporting, certainly individual retail customers, much higher bar from corporates in assessing whether we're the right company for them to put their corporate pension schemes with, but an ambition overall that reporting in the right way about the right things could help unlock that engagement in something which is fundamentally important to our financial wellness in our overall life course.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And I think you're right. A very important topic we need to get more conversations about. So we're coming towards the end of the live now, but I just wanted to finish with each of you just giving your top tips for how to improve trust through transparent reporting. So, Jon, let me come to you first.
I think there's two things. Probably it's understand what are the 3 or 4 key messages you want to get across, and keep it simple.
Like it. Keep it simple.
Wow. I mean, what to add? That's absolutely spot on. There's an expression that goes around, isn't there? I wrote a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one. And I use that probably annoyingly at work because I think it's really relevant to reporting. It echoes Jon's point about what are the 2 or 3 things that are really important. Think about what you want to say on those. Think about the impact that you're trying to have, not just the things you're trying to do. And think about telling that story in a way which is compelling with the people you want to communicate it to. And be big and brave and bold in doing that. I totally agree with Jon about, have an exec summary at the front that tells you what you need, even if that does mean it gets repeated on page 92 and 92 million. But tell a story as well as meet the reporting regs.
Brilliant, thank you. And let me just say, in case anyone's worried about it, I've been an auditor for a very long time and I've never yet found an annual report that's actually 1 million pages long. So hopefully we haven't got to that yet. But I think those are really good key messages. What is it exactly you want to communicate? Keep it simple and keep it concise. That's how we build, I think, trust in reporting. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. We've recorded this live, so you'll be able to find it on PwC's UK YouTube page if you want to remind yourself of any of the tips and advice that Claire and Jon have shared with us. So thank you very much to Claire and to Jon for joining me today. Thank you all for listening. And of course, you can connect with any of us on LinkedIn if you would like to. For now, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.